Today we have Jonathan Zdziarski. He's also known as Nerve Gas. He's one of the original hackers of the iPhone. Hello, Jonathan.
How are you doing, Catherine?
Good. How are you?
Excellent, thanks.
Good. Jonathan, as you know, is the author of several books, including iPhone Forensics, which is about to release any day now. You can order it now, or you can ask for it in your local bookstores. It should probably arrive sometime next week. Jonathan is also leading a 2-day forensics workshop for professionals, security professionals, next week, September 16th and 17th in Burlington, Massachusetts. The cost for this workshop is $3,500 for the general public, and vetted law enforcement professionals and government employees get a $1,000 discount. That will be $2,500. We're also offering a 20% discount off the regular price. If you want to register and enter the code Webcast, that's W-E-B-C-A-S-T, all lowercase, then you'll save 20% off the regular price. And this doesn't apply to the law enforcement discount, only to the regular price. We also have an upcoming event, a new event for us. It's called iPhone Live, a one-day conference in San Jose on November 18th. And you can find out more information about that on our conferences site, conference.o'reilly.com/iPhone Live. And you can find out about all things iPhone at iphone.o'reilly.com, including Jonathan's books, his upcoming workshop, and any conferences related to the iPhone. And so now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jonathan. Just want to add one more thing, that webcasts, the nature of them is they're streaming information, and so sometimes there is a lag in the amount of time it takes the information, the visuals, to render on your screen. There's nothing we can really do about that, but if you're really having a problem, please use your chat to send me news about that. I can't change it, but I would like some feedback on it during the presentation. Also, if you have questions, use the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of your screen, and that way, Jonathan, it'll show us that you have a question to ask, and Jonathan will answer as many questions as he can, and he's looking forward to doing that during the presentation. And someone's asking me right now if they're the only attendee. I know that you don't see the list of attendees, but no, there are quite a few people attending this presentation. So thank you for joining us. And Jonathan, I'm turning it over to you now.
Thanks, Catherine. Am I coming through okay?
You are.
All right, great. I want to welcome you. The last time we met here talking about forensics was earlier this year, I believe, when we did a forensic demonstration of a first-generation iPhone. And we got into several different details about how the iPhone stores data, what kind of information is on the iPhone. It was really interesting, but at the time, the forensics manual was only available for law enforcement. And over that past, I believe it was about 6 months, we have given the law enforcement version of the forensics manual to about 200 to 250 different law enforcement agencies around the country. And one of the great things in being able to do that is that we got to not only work directly with some great law enforcement officers to get the experience of knowing how data on the iPhone is important, but we also got a whole lot of feedback from many different departments and precincts about how we could improve the manual, how we could, what was needed to enhance it, any kinds of technical errors. So we've since gotten the resources. O'Reilly Media gave me the resources to take this law enforcement manual and turn it into a full-blown book. And so what's gone from, it started out as about 12 to 13 pages and grew to about 40 pages, has now become about a 140-page full-blown iPhone forensics book. And it's been essentially in editing for the past 6 months as it's been circulating to law enforcement. So it's quite a feat in that we've been able to push out what's turned out to be a very high-tech, very up-to-date book addressing even the most recent versions of iPhone software that are available today. And that's going to be released. I believe the in-stock date on that is tomorrow. Amazon has it listed for Monday, but you will get it very soon next week, like Catherine said. But we're very happy, very pleased to see that this information has finally been put in some type of form that we feel comfortable sharing it with the general world at large. And the purpose of this webcast today is to break into the iPhone to demonstrate how we actually get into the device to conduct these forensic examinations. And previously, if you attended the last demonstration, we showed a first-generation device and a tool called iLiberty, which essentially booted a custom forensics RAM disk that we had designed. When the iPhone 3G came out, things changed on a technical level, but in terms of actually getting the forensic data off the device, not a whole lot has changed conceptually. And so this demonstration is to show you the foundation of the forensics recovery kits that we've built, and just show you essentially how insecure the iPhone can be for enterprises, but also show you how much control enterprises also have over devices that they deploy on their network. So if you're an enterprise and you're thinking about deploying iPhone on the network, this is sort of a double-edged sword, this webcast, in that, yes, we show that pretty much every version of the iPhone software from 1.0 all the way up to the latest version 2.02 has backdoors essentially that can be exploited to load private data off of the device. That's the downside for most enterprises. The upside is that you have disgruntled employees that leave the company all the time. You have people who are stealing from the company. These are responsibilities of a corporate information officer to be able to access any kind of data that's been potentially destroyed or just locked out by such a person. And so the upside to this is that we can essentially recover all of this information, all of your company assets that are on the phone, which is good news. To law enforcement, if any law enforcement agencies are attending this webcast, essentially this is the front door that is being used, the very basic access, first step essentially in accessing the iPhone. From here, we've got all types of different toolkits and different types of uses that you could perform this type of break on. If your goal is to gather evidence for a crime, this basically gives you access to the device to be able to download the raw disk image. And we're not going to cover that in any real detail today. We'll leave that up to the book. But this is sort of the first step that gets you in. And so depending on what it is you're doing, there are a number of additional steps that you can take. One thing that we tried to do in the book, for example, is to show you how to build your own custom recovery toolkit or any other kind of payload. So if you take what you learn in the webcast today and apply some additional tools to it, you can essentially use this as a springboard to install custom payload. You can install, there are a couple of valid needs I've heard from enterprises that are looking to do logging and remote type of I don't want to call it surveillance, but that type of remote activity monitoring on the iPhone. There are a number of just different uses that you could apply this to. We do not encourage using this, of course, to perform anything that would be otherwise illegal and infringement of someone's rights. And there's of course no way that we can stop that. But what we're showing today is for the purpose of education. We're showing you how to do this essentially so that you can be aware of some security flaws, as well as be aware of just how to conduct lawful examinations of a device. So now that I've gone through that spiel, I guess I'll explain a little bit technically about what you're going to see today. And everything with respect to the iPhone starts off with a vulnerability. The jailbreaking community started up last year when the iPhone was first released, and everyone's goal has been to unlock the device, run their own software on the device. It's one of the most popular mobile devices in existence right now. And of course, that desire to do creative things with the device has led to many different camps of hackers and developers that have sought to get into the phone. So the technical steps to get into the phone, specifically with the iPhone 3G, are taking advantage of a vulnerability that in the 3G's case exists in the boot ROM itself. And the boot ROM is actually a piece of firmware that's on the chip that in order to patch this kind of vulnerability, you'd essentially need to replace the chip that's in the phone, which is one of the reasons that there's been a lot of hype recently in the hacking community, because they finally have a hack that's going to stick for quite a while. And so this process will essentially take advantage of that flaw in the boot ROM to allow the device to boot an unsigned firmware package. Now, if you've got an iPhone, you're probably familiar with how firmware packages work. You download them through iTunes, and then you install them. That installs to the iPhone through the USB cable. Normally, it's supposed to have Apple software on it. The steps, just to give them to you ahead of time, is first I'm going to demo a very popular tool most of you have probably heard of named pwnage, which is a tool that's designed for building a custom firmware package. And this tool does two important things, and I'll actually bring this up here. Let me share out my display. One second here. Share desktop. I'm doing this on a Mac, so if you're running on Windows, this is going to be a little bit different. This is the pwnage tool, and it's a freeware tool that you can download. Most people use it to essentially jailbreak their device. And what we're going to do is we'll use it to build an initial bundle, which gives us a kernel that can run our own custom software. And the other purpose that this will serve is that it will essentially allow us to make the changes we need to pwn the phone. To get the phone to accept unsigned firmware. It drops the necessary files in iTunes home folder so that iTunes can relay this unsigned package. It basically it sets the stage for us to build our own custom firmware bundle. So we'll go through this first, and this is just very simple. As you can see, it's very idiot-proof, which is fortunate for me. You launch pwnage. I prefer expert mode, and then you just simply select which device it is that you're looking to jailbreak. iPhone 3G is the device I'm going to be working on today. You click the next button. This gives you a selection of the different types of firmware that you want to modify, and the firmware that you choose should either match or succeed the version of firmware on the phone. The phone that I've got right here is running 202, so I'm going to choose the 202 bundle as soon as it pops up on the screen here. Take just a second. Okay, so we have 202. So we click that, very simple. We go through the settings. Now, this program, like I said, this is designed to normally blow away the contents of the iPhone and create a jailbroken environment. So we've got to do a few custom things to that. The first thing we want to do is take a look at the activation here. If we want to force activate the phone, you can leave that checked. In most cases, you can uncheck that if the phone is already activated or would activate in iTunes. You go through, there are a couple of screens that you can just accept the defaults on. These two options are normally checked by default. They are third-party software installers, and they are what allows the open community to have access to the many different repositories for third-party iPhone software. We don't really need either of those since we're not installing any third-party software, so we can uncheck them. The boot logos and whatnot are useful for debugging. For example, if you want to see if your custom bundle actually installed okay, I'll uncheck those for now. And then from there, basically, you're going to go and you click Build, and that's going to save this initial custom firmware bundle on your device. On your desktop. Now, I've already got this takes about 10 minutes to do, so I've already got a package prepared here. I'm not going to go ahead and save it. After this does build, you go through a very simple process where you shut the device down and you place it into a certain fail-safe mode. After it's placed in that fail-safe mode is when the actual magic happens, where it's actually set up to accept this custom firmware. Normally, the iPhone's going to reject anything that's not approved by Apple and signed directly by Apple. So this doesn't get us very far. What this gets us basically is a custom firmware bundle that normally would blow away the contents of the phone and set up this jailbroken iPhone, with a couple third-party software installers and whatnot. That's not very useful to us, especially if we are trying to conduct forensic examination. The big goal of doing forensic analysis is you cannot or should not touch any user data that's on the device. So what we need to do essentially from here is we've got this custom firmware bundle, and right here is the copy that I saved earlier. It's basically the same thing as you would download through iTunes, only pwnage has taken Apple's version. They've patched it slightly so that it will run custom software. They've added a few different pieces to it. There are a number of different types of protections that Apple has included in their firmware that's designed to prevent you from running anything that's not specifically signed by Apple. So they've basically removed those protections, written the patched kernel into this firmware file, and it saves it to your desktop. From here, what we want to do is we've got a custom payload that I've prepared here, which is a passcode breaking payload, and that's pretty much all it does. I've taken out all of the pieces that normally would install a recovery kit and
hey,
grab
Jonathan?
the raw disk. Yes?
Any chance you can make that window a little bit bigger so we can see it?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Okay.
Okay, is that better?
That's better. If you could do, that's good. Thanks.
Okay, no problem. So you can see right here, this firmware file looks a lot like what you would download through iTunes. iTunes would normally give you iPhone 1. Whatever and just end in IPSW. They've added their custom restore in there. We want to take this and fuse it with a very simple payload that I've created here, and I'll show you what it is basically. It's a zip file that contains just a couple of different tools, namely some libraries that are needed, as well as some basic UNIX tools such as Bash, which is a script interpreter, shell script interpreter, a couple of other tools to mount and unmount disks, and then our script, our actual payload script, and I'll show you how this works. What we want to do is run this, we want to fire this script off essentially on the device, and what this does is I'll run down here, it mounts the disks, and then it deletes a file, which is a preference file stored on the device. The reason this preference file is deleted is because that's the preference that sets the passcode. The passcode itself is stored in the keychain, but the status of the passcode lock, whether it's on or off, is stored in this preference file. So if you've got a device that has a passcode set, it's going to write that into the status into the file. If you've tried the passcode more than 10 times, it will lock up the iPhone, and it will actually write a disabled status into this file. So by deleting it, we're doing two things. Number one, we're removing the passcode lock preference completely so that the device will not think there's a passcode set any longer. And number two, if the phone has already been locked up, and this has happened a few times from investigations where the officer tried a bunch of codes, didn't realize that this could happen. If the device is locked up, it will unlock the device, undisable the device essentially, so that you can get back into it. After we've deleted that preference file, there are a couple basic things that we need to do. These 3 lines that you see here that call a tool called NVRAM basically set a couple of different settings in the device that tell the device to go ahead and boot now. Whenever you put the device into restore mode, it normally sits, it's kind of like your laptop suddenly not booting anymore. All of the data is still there, but because your boot sector has been blown away or your boot settings have been changed, the laptop doesn't boot. So what we do is we go and set those back to where they're supposed to be so that the device will boot after we're done operating on it. And then finally, we just clean up a little bit. We sync the disk, we unmount the partitions, and then we reboot. The iPhone at that point reboots directly into the iPhone interface without a passcode. So it's a nice little script. How do we get it on the device? Well, what we do is we take this custom firmware file that we created. And normally what a firmware package does is it will go and upgrade the software on the iPhone, or will replace the software on the iPhone. We're going to completely interrupt and bypass that whole process. And what we're going to do is replace the firmware software with our own little script that does nothing more than remotely mount the iPhone's disk and remove that passcode. So the firmware is going to be uploaded to the iPhone. The iPhone is going to run it thinking that it's a firmware upgrade. That runs out of memory, out of RAM disk. While that's running, it's going to mount the actual solid-state storage that's in the iPhone, the disk that's in the iPhone essentially, and perform on it kind of like what you would do if you were trying to get into a laptop by pulling the hard drive out and sticking it into another computer. So I'll show you how to set this up now. We've got this firmware restore that we created. We're going to create a directory, I'll just call it firmware. And we want to unzip the contents of this custom firmware bundle into the firmware directory. And fortunately, the Apple firmware update is just a zip file with an IPSW extension. So we are extracting the contents of that. That's about 250 megs, so it'll take a couple of seconds here. And what this dumps out, there are 2 primary disk images that you'll find inside a firmware update. One is the file system that normally gets written to the iPhone when you update. In other words, it's the bundle of software. The other file that's important here is the RAM disk that the iPhone boots as a RAM disk, and that fires off the initial firmware update. You can't be running off of the same disk that you're going to be updating, so the firmware updater, of course, runs out of RAM. So we've got that extracted, and I'll just show you right here. These are, the 2 disk images. The smaller one right here is going to be the RAM disk. Now, the RAM disk is currently encrypted. So the first step in actually customizing this is we need to decrypt the RAM disk. There is a tool, and I'll paste that into the box, into the chat window so you can have the URL. But there's another tool called XProTool, which was written by one of the dev team members named Planet Being. And the XProTool, let me see if I can find it. It's not that one. It is this one. The XProTool is a set of command line tools. And among them, one of them is able to actually decrypt and re-encrypt an iPhone firmware RAM disk. So let me paste that into the window. I'll put it right in the chat window here. Catherine, tell me if this is coming through. Okay. You should have the URL there. Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay,
it's right
great.
there.
from there you can download binaries or the source code and actually build the software. I've already got it installed here. So what I'm going to essentially do is I'm going to decrypt this RAM disk. And in order to do that, you need to have a key for the RAM disk itself. Well, the XProTool bundle includes a set of configuration files for each version of the firmware that it supports. And as new versions of iPhone software are released, the XProTool bundle is also updated. And if you look, after you install it, if you're on a Mac, you'll see these in user local firmware bundles. If you're installing XProTool on Windows or on Linux, it'll be in a different location, but it'll be very easy to find in the archive. But these different, you see all these different versions here of software. So depending on what version of firmware that you're creating and what type of device you have, and I'll show you two things. You can see that you have iPhone 1,1. 1,1 refers to the first generation iPhones. For anything that's running, the original iPhone hardware. That is the version of the bundle version that you would want to use. If you are running an iPhone 3G, you'll notice that the firmware is named iPhone 1,2. And you'll see the same in the software that you download from iTunes. In other words, when you plug the phone up, click Update in iTunes, it'll go and download the correct version. You'll also see that there are a couple of iPod versions in here as well. So the version that we're working with, as I mentioned, is iPhone software 1,2, and the version number is 2.0.2. And so it looks like I didn't bother updating that, but I already have the keys. I'll show you on, let's see, I'll show you on another version. It's not really that necessary to give you the exact. Okay, so let's say I was working on 2.0.1. So this is the bundle that I would look at, and you'll see as you go into this directory, you'll see there are a bunch of patches, and these are all the different patches that get applied by the pwnage tool when you actually build this custom bundle that we walked through before. But you'll see in here, the most important files is called info plist. And in here is where you'll find a list of encryption keys for the RAM disks that you're going to be decrypting. So you find the version that you're looking for, you open the info plist, and then you'll see right here that there is a restore RAM disk dictionary entry in this property list. And in here, there are two very important values that you want to pull out of this file. The first is the initialization vector, and the second is the actual encryption key. Those are the two things you're going to need to be able to decrypt and re-encrypt the RAM disk. So, like I said, I've already got the version 2.2 keys, or 202 keys, from a different config file that apparently I didn't install. They are right here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to run XProTool, and I'm going to decrypt the RAM disk that came out of this custom firmware bundle. So XProTool, and then we installed in firmware. So I'm going to grab the smaller of the two files. I'm going to call it passcode.dmg. It's a disk image. And then I need to provide these settings up here, these command line arguments, to provide the key and the initialization vector. So I'll just paste that in. And it only takes about a second to decrypt it. So now what you see here is a passcode.dmg disk image. And that is basically the same as the firmware RAM disk, only it's been decrypted. Once it's been decrypted, we can actually mount it and change it around. And that's what we want to do here. Is first we want to make sure we're root. And we do that so it'll help us preserve the file permissions that we write. So once we're root, on Mac, we can mount this using the HDID tool. So we do HDID read-read-write, passcode.dmg. And we'll see in just a second that it's mounted it in volumes under the name RAM disk. And if you look in volumes RAM disk, you can actually see all of the different files that are used to boot the RAM disk. This is the RAM disk file system. So the next thing we do is, if you recall, there's this passcode prep bundle that I showed you before. And this basically just has a copy of bash, a couple of different UNIX tools, and the libraries, the supporting libraries that we need, as well as our little script. So we want to take that and we want to stick it on the RAM disk file system somewhere. So I'm going to unzip it, tell it to use volumes RAM disk as the destination, and provide the file name. Oh, and this is good because I failed to mention also what you need to do is free up a little bit of space on the RAM disk. And since you're not doing a firmware update, there is a directory named user local standalone firmware that's located on the RAM disk, and you can see the path to it on the screen. And you can safely delete all of the files from this directory to make up room on the RAM disk. What this has is your new baseband and a couple of other different files that basically get written to different pieces of the firmware. I believe one is a wireless firmware. A few other files. Since you're not doing an actual firmware upgrade, you don't need them. So we delete them to make up the space, and then we can rerun this, and now, now it's succeeded. So if we look again on volumes RAM disk, we've got the payloads directory that we created. We've got bin bash and all the other utilities that we wanted to put on the RAM disk. The only thing that's left to do with this RAM disk now is we need to modify the launch daemon script. There is a launchd manifest that kicks off the normal firmware update that occurs when you try and update the software, and we want to redirect it. So instead of calling the firmware update program, which is called restoredexternal on 2.0, what we want to do is we want to call our bash script instead. So we just change this manifest to call bash. We add an argument with the path to the install script. And that should be all we need to do. Then we can save that. You can use HDI util on Mac to unmount it. Oops. HDI util unmount RAM disk. Okay, there's no dash for unmounting it. And now we've got the decrypted RAM disk that we've modified in this passcode.dmg file. So the next thing we have to do is we need to get it back into the firmware. And the easiest way to do that is I'm going to take this firmware and I'm going to copy it to another directory called Passcode. That'll take just a minute here. And what we're going to do is we're going to use XProTool again, only we're going to encrypt the custom RAM disk that we created. And this custom RAM disk now is going to get written into a firmware bundle, which will zip back up into an IPSW firmware file. And then I'll show you how to boot that off the phone. And that essentially will get rid of our passcode. So I copied our firmware directory that came out of this IPSW file. I copied it to another location because we need the original. I'm going to zero out the larger file because we really don't need it, and all it does is take up time and space. We are going to rebuild the RAM disk file, so we can go ahead and delete that too. And then the next thing we do is I've got this little make passcode script. I'll show you what it does essentially. Is we've already deleted the RAM disk from this custom bundle. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to call XProTool again to re-encrypt it. And XProTool takes a couple different arguments now, and I'll show you how this works. The first argument is to your unencrypted RAM disk. The second argument is where you want to stick the re-encrypted RAM disk, and that's going back in the passcode directory that we just copied over. The third argument is a template file, and what this does is this provides the path name to the original encrypted RAM disk that came off of the pwnage version of the firmware. And this template is used to build the headers that we need to actually bundle this RAM disk into the file. There are a couple different custom headers that are used, 8900 headers and whatnot. And so we need to grab those from the original file, and that's what the purpose of the template is. So we provide all of that, and we provide the key and the initialization vector again. We give this give this a second to run. And you can see now basically what this did is we've got our 3990 file back, that's the file that our encrypted RAM disk is in. So once that's done, I'll display the script again. After that's done, we just delete any remnants of an old passcode firmware. We cd into the passcode directory. This is the one we just made that we just copied our current RAM disk into, our custom RAM disk. And then we re-zip it, and I'll type it in here. We're basically just creating, I'm going to call it passcode.ipsw. This is going to be our custom firmware bundle that we actually upload to the phone. So we take that, it goes and recompresses everything back into the IPSW. And now, if you look back in your home directory, this is the finished file that you're going to send to the iPhone now. We assume that the iPhone has already been pwned. You've already gone through pwnage. You've used that to create this custom firmware, as well as put the device into the mode where it will accept this custom firmware. And from here, you're ready to crack the passcode. So I'm going to show you. I'll pull up this photo out. What is it? It's called Photo Booth, and I'll show you the iPhone I'm using here. I'll try to keep myself out of the picture because I know I'm ugly. So you've got iPhone that's currently protected with the passcode, and I'll flip it off and back on here for a second.
Okay, it hasn't loaded yet, Jonathan.
Okay,
I think this is kind of slow, so give it a second.
Yeah,
all right, starting to come up now. There we go.
Okay, so we've got the iPhone here, and you can see if I slide this little slider now, it's going to be protected with the passcode. So unless you know the passcode, at this point what you want to do is you want to hold in the power button like I'm doing right now. That will give you the slide to power off. And so we're going to slide it and power it off, and you can see the little spinning indicator shutting the device down. And while that's shutting down, I'm going to boot into iTunes. And the version of iTunes I'm using here is 7.7. I have not tested 8.0 because it just came out, I believe, yesterday. I've heard some conflicting reports about whether that works or not. It's not entirely relevant what version you run, as long as it will allow you to upload a custom firmware bundle. So I would recommend just sticking with 7.7 for now. So you've got this device. It's now powered off. Which the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hold in the power and the home button together for about 10 or 15 seconds. And as we're holding it in, the device is going to power on, but it's not going to boot. It's going to give us a restore screen, the Connect to iTunes screen. So there's the Apple. And now, can you see that yet, Catherine, the little Connect to iTunes screen? Just let me know when it pops up, and I'll...
Hey, Jonathan?
Uh-huh.
It's up now.
Okay, great. So we've got the Connect to iTunes screen now. The device is still intact. The only thing that's essentially changed is that we've stopped it from booting up. And so in this recovery mode, what we're going to do is you see in iTunes that there's a restore option. Here, let me close this for a second. There's a restore option in iTunes. Normally, if you just click restore, it's going to restore the latest firmware. On Mac, if you hold in the option button and click restore, and on Windows, if you hold in the shift button and click restore, it gives you a little pop-up window where you can choose which firmware file you want to upload. And so you could see that, if you were to go into, let's see, Library, iTunes, iPhone software updates, you can see all the different versions of iPhone software that iTunes has downloaded. For us, what we want to do is we want to take our Passcode bundle, the one that we just created, and we want to upload that instead. So that's going to extract the software. And let me bring this back up here. That's going to try and install our custom bundle onto the iPhone. And that whole process usually takes about a minute or two. I'm hoping tonight that it'll take less than 60 seconds, because the title of my talk at Ignite Boston is iPhone Passcode Gone in 60 Seconds. As you can see, the whole process takes a little more than 60 seconds to prepare it, but actually executing the payload should take about a minute. And you can see that it's spinning, and now the iPhone has rebooted. iTunes is still actually spinning. It thinks that it's still installing the firmware. It's kind of oblivious to what's going on right now. Since we're not imaging it, it went and basically deleted the passcode, and then it rebooted the phone. And from there, iTunes is just sitting waiting the time out. So it's safe to unplug once you see it reboot. And then it usually takes another minute or so for the file system to get checked. And as you can see now, hopefully, at least within the next few seconds, once your bandwidth catches up, the iPhone's now booted back up. And it doesn't have a passcode this time. The passcode's been deleted. If the device had been disabled, then it would have been re-enabled as well as the passcode deleted. That's all contained in that one file. And at this point now, you have full access to the iPhone. Normally, what you'd want to do is install a forensics payload. We're not covering that in this webcast, but if you're really interested in doing examination, you can grab a copy of the book that does explain how to use some of the payloads that we've got up on our website. What's also interesting as well, if you're I had a few questions come in before the conference, and there were some that were interested in developing and designing their own toolkits. And if you're wanting to do that, there is an open source compiler for the iPhone, affectionately called the toolchain. And basically that is a C++ compiler, an Objective-C compiler, that will allow you to write your own custom software. You can build your own UNIX tools. If you're just looking to build a bash script or something to that effect, you can do that very easily. You can learn more about that in my other book, iPhone Open Applications Development. So now we're done here. As you can see, iTunes kind of crapped out, and again, it's oblivious to what's going on. So it says it was a miserable failure, and it's happy believing that. So we can just quit that, and let me bring the WebEx window back up here and unshare the desktop. And I've got a few. Hang on a sec here. I've got a few more questions that came in before the conference that I just want to make sure I address, and then we can take some general questions if you have any. But some people had asked about more flaws that the iPhone has, and there are a number of flaws. Some of them are much more dangerous than this flaw. This is the type of flaw that really can only be exploited by someone who has physical access to the device. And if you are a law enforcement officer, if you work for an enterprise, if you own your own device and need to recover deleted files, there are a number of legitimate reasons that you could take advantage of this particular vulnerability. Someone who gets a hold of your iPhone, on the other hand, and has more malicious intentions can also take advantage of that. So obviously you don't want to trust any of your data based on a passcode at this point, because all versions of iPhone software are susceptible to this. This isn't really a software vulnerability. This is closer to a hardware vulnerability that's being exploited in the phone. Other flaws exist, and some of the older flaws that we took advantage of in the 1.1 firmware included image processing vulnerabilities, included symlink vulnerabilities, things like that. And those are generally more dangerous. The image processing vulnerability could be used to execute your own code on someone else's iPhone just merely by that person going to your website. And we actually had a pretty nifty tool that had been released by the iPhone dev team at jailbreakme.com. This was last fall, I believe. And the tool exploited this vulnerability on the iPhone in that version of the software. And it actually ran its own program to patch the vulnerability, and it allowed you to jailbreak your iPhone. So there are definitely some very solid proofs of concept out there for some of those types of vulnerabilities. As far as some other questions, I had some questions about the procedures. And granted, what you've probably seen, I know if I was watching this, I would probably be sort of glossed over at this point. There were quite a few different steps involved in creating this package. And so the full procedures for this are much more clearly laid out in the book. There are also some additional procedures for building your own custom toolkit. O'Reilly is providing a mirror of the forensic recovery kit, which is sort of a generalized toolkit that it's the kit we're providing to law enforcement and anyone who buys the book, essentially, to recover the raw disk image. It gives you those tools. But there are a number of other procedures, and the procedures for the first generation iPhones running 1.x software are different. So if you're interested in all of those procedures, you can find that in the book. We had gotten a lot of questions about preservation of data and just how much data is stored on the device. And I'm not going to perform a full forensic workup, but I suppose I can share the desktop out maybe one more time just to give you an idea. I just recently put together a sample recovery for the forensics workshop that's coming up next week. And so I happen to have a lot of files that have been recovered from the device. But essentially, to give you the basic rundown, anything that you put on that device is recoverable. And in fact, if you visit my website right now, zdziarski.com, you'll even see that this morning I posted some images that apparently seem to have been put on at the factory. Just some photos of people. I have no idea who they are. Never took any pictures of them, but at some point in the development process or the imaging process, someone snapped some pictures of these individuals, and they wound up on my iPhone. So that was there before I even bought the device. But anything that you type is going to get stored, whether it's in an email or an instant message, or even if you're Googling. Basically, anything you type is going to get stored in multiple places, including a keyboard cache. Any voicemail that gets downloaded, and I can give you an example here. This AMR file is just an old deleted voicemail that our neighbors across the street had left for us. And thank you.
Hi, Jonathan, it's Alexa. We're going to be out of town for the night.
And that was actually left about a month or two ago, I guess, before I did this. So deleted messages are very readily available. A lot of pictures, any picture that you take, of course, and I can show you some examples. There are actually quite a few interesting photos that you can recover from the phone. Now, your typical pictures that you're going to get are the ones that were taken by the camera, and they're a little distorted here due to, using the cover flow view. But you see some pictures of my 4-year-old son, and just so there are other pictures in here somewhere. But the more interesting photos, and what you're looking at right now, for example, is an image, a screenshot that gets taken every time you push the home button. And the reason that happens is so that the iPhone can give you the neat little 3D zoom effects and it gives you the image sort of shrinking off and zooming into the background, while the new application that you launch comes back up to the front. Well, that, of course, means that you have to take a screenshot of it, and Apple decided for some reason to write those screenshots to disk. So you're going to have several different, possibly hundreds of different screenshots of a suspect's activity or an employee's activity on the iPhone. And you can see even their map lookups. If they use the GPS, you'll be able to see some of the last positions that they were looking at. Recent calls, people that you've called in the past, emails. None of this is really that private, which is why I don't have a problem sharing it. These are old AIM photos from using the Instant Messenger. Google Alerts, anything you're browsing with. Pretty much, and my lunch the other day. So, any photo that exists on the iPhone, and probably a whole lot more than you think, can be readily recovered from there. And that extends, of course, into icons, Google Map tiles, GPS coordinates of the last place you got a GPS fix, if you've done any direction lookups. In other words, if I want to plot directions from my house to somewhere I'm, conducting a drug deal with someone, they will be able to recover that very easily. And so with that, of course, comes the question of, well, how do you prevent forensic analysis from being performed on your iPhone? And the only real valid answer to that is to not commit any crimes that are going to get you arrested and your iPhone seized. Until such a time that Apple decides to install something like File Vault onto the iPhone, there really is no way to protect your phone from this type of investigation. With the exception, of course, of basic laws of due process and whatnot. If a criminal were to steal your phone, or a family member, perhaps looking for some personal information, there is no reason that they couldn't conduct the same type of analysis if they're bright enough to do so. So the best thing I can tell you, if you're looking to avoid this, is to not commit crimes, and to never surrender physical access to the device. Don't leave it on a table somewhere. Don't leave it on the shelf if you want to put it down and look at something at a store. I've heard all kinds of crazy stories about people who've had their iPhones hijacked as a result of that. The only other thing I guess I'd mention that may be of some interest to the listeners is what exactly has all of this information been used for? Well, I mentioned over the past 6 months that we've given this as a law enforcement only manual to various agencies. I don't know how a lot of you feel about things like privacy and whatnot. I've met some very, very good men and women who are helping to enforce our laws and protect the country, and so I know that it's at the very least being used for a lot of good. There's just nothing we can do about someone who wants to use it for bad intentions. But some of the good news that I've heard, though, is that it really is making a difference in terms of catching criminals. There have been a number of cases where murders, rapes, all kinds of sexual assaults have been performed, and the only physical evidence that had been available were photos that had been taken on an iPhone. There were a couple of different cases involving people whose iPhones had been seized, but they didn't know where the person was. And the information from the GPS and whatnot helped to locate these individuals. And I guess this being 9/11, it might even be appropriate to mention that it's been used in a couple of cases to identify previously unknown terrorists. Everybody I know and their brother, including myself, thought the terrorists used these disposable phones, the little throw-out prepaid ones. But from what I'm told by some, very reputable federal agencies, is that some terrorists are tech heads too, and so they get the high technology devices like this and they use it, and they've actually been able to identify not just individual people, but keep in mind you're talking about an entire address book of contacts that are being stored on this. So I don't want to go as far as say terrorist networks, but a long list of people who were formerly unknown and related to terrorism. These good guys have been able to find from lifting this data from the iPhone. So I've been very encouraged in all of the different cases I've heard of, and I've gotten the privilege to be able to help out on a couple of different cases to do my own examinations. But I've been very pleased to see that that it actually surprisingly is effective in stopping some crimes. So hopefully with the release of this book, hopefully we'll see that start to trickle into the enterprise as well. And disgruntled employees that try and steal information, are going to be either prosecuted or at least the information will be recoverable. So that's of course my goal in releasing the book. So I've gone and talked on for almost an hour now. I guess I could take some questions, Catherine.
There are quite a few questions if you want to look at the Q&A tab and just scroll through those. Maybe you want to choose which you want to answer.
Sure, I'll thumb through this. In terms of, let's see, the latest question I see on here is Andrew Newby's question, and I presume Newby's not his last name, but if it is, I apologize. What, if any, of the iPhone's data can be extracted remotely? And remotely itself is kind of a loose term. If I'm sitting here on a Wi-Fi network, the actual forensic recovery process uses Wi-Fi to recover the raw disk. And the reason that's done over Wi-Fi and not USB is for a couple of reasons. Number one, because you're using the USB when you install the recovery payload. That would be the ideal time to do it. But because you're using that USB, it makes it more difficult, especially when you're dealing with an unsupported tool. If iTunes is sitting there hogging the ports and may respond unpredictably if you try and do something over the USB. The other reason is because a jury doesn't understand low-level proprietary custom protocols, and even if they do, you don't want to create even a shadow of a doubt that perhaps the data wasn't recovered in a pristine format. And there are extra safeguards that we've added as well, such as MD5 checksums, and you can actually do the full recovery through an SSH tunnel to prevent tampering. But Wi-Fi is the most easily understood wireless technology out there, or most easily understood data transit technology out there for your average person. So that's conducted over Wi-Fi, and the process does take a couple of hours to get the full disk image across. But we have, again, we've provided a lot of tools to try and make that secure as well. I'm just scrolling up here. As far as I'll answer Brian Chen's question. Would you mind repeating the part about the iPhone storing everything as screenshots? Well, essentially, it is kind of a cache. What I don't understand is why that needs to get written to disk. I presume it's because some type of inter-process communication needs to take place, and for whatever reason, Apple's developers decided it would be best to just write a temporary file. But when you push the home button, the contents of the screen are dumped. And the purpose in doing that is the nice little aesthetic effect that you have where you see your mail, for example, zoomed to the back. And as a result, that screenshot gets written to a temporary file somewhere, zoomed to the back, and then apparently deleted immediately. If it was just done in memory, you wouldn't be able to recover it from the disk. So that's how we know it's written to the disk somewhere. But that's what you can recover, and that includes any application you're running, because that whole process is performed by the Springboard application itself. So there's no real way to prevent that I know of. To be honest, I'm a little divided on it. I hope Apple fixes it because it is a significant privacy leak. But at the same time, it's become very useful in prosecuting criminals, and I imagine it will be useful in investigating enterprise crimes as well. Catherine, if you see one or two you'd like to ask too, I'm kind of scrolling through these.
Okay, there were a couple people who asked about what happens when the new iPhone firmware comes out 2.1, the new 2.1 firmware comes out?
Sure. 2.1 is supposedly going to be out tomorrow. And there have been a few rumors. So far, they've proven to be most likely untrue. The rumor that I had heard was that a new encryption mechanism was being used to make it more difficult. I believe, from what I've seen, that this is only the case on the new iPod Touch that was released this week. There is a new decryption mechanism on the device itself that doesn't appear to be present on iPhone 3Gs. And what it basically does is it allows Apple to send the encrypted firmware directly to the phone, and only the phone can decrypt it. And of course, you can't get into the phone unless you decrypt it, and you can't decrypt it unless you get into the phone. So the goal with that is to make the iPod Touch virtually uncrackable. I don't know what the status of that whole hacking effort is going to be. I suspect that by the time the new iPhones were to roll out, say maybe a year from now with that kind of technology, that hopefully the hacking camps will have found a way around it. But to my knowledge, in respect to the existing devices that are out there, the first generation iPhones and the iPhone 3Gs, that technology doesn't appear to be on the device. And if it was on the device, we've already got access to the device to be able to extract it. So all signs seem to point to 2.1 being relatively the same as the other versions. They may have changed some file names around and whatnot, but in terms of actually applying this forensic toolkit to it, with every version of iPhone firmware that's released, there is about a 2-week update period where the maintainers of these various tools, such as pwnage and xpone, they will go and update their tools to support the latest version of firmware. We'll do the same with the forensic recovery kit if we need to make any changes to it. And so I would say that within 2 to 3 weeks, if everything goes smoothly, you should see all of these tools eventually supporting the new 2.1 firmware.
Okay. So will you have information about that on your site?
We will. I'll also have the online repository that complements the iPhone Forensics book. Contains a different directory for each major version of the recovery toolkit. For example, there's a different toolkit for 1.x. There's a toolkit for 2.0, which works from 2.0.0 to 2.0.2. If we need to make any changes, we'll also create a 2.1 directory there. And inside that directory, we'll place the updated forensic toolkit, the recovery toolkit. And if any procedural changes should need to take place, I don't believe they will. I believe you'll be able to use the same instructions that are in the book. But if any do need to take place, we'll have a release notes section that will update the procedures from the book to cover 2.1 as well.
Okay, good. Well, there are quite a few questions, but it's after 11, and I noticed that people are logging off quickly. So I'm thinking perhaps we should put the questions on hold, and let me think. People can email you directly. Is that true, Jonathan, if they have questions, or would you prefer that they posted them on your forum on the O'Reilly site?
Yeah, I think the best way to do that would be to put your questions on the forum of the iPhone Forensics book.
Okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we take all the questions that we have unanswered here, and we can post them on the forum there, or ask users to, and you can get to them when you get a chance.
I'll tell you what, I've got an even better idea, and you're welcome to do that too. I think what I'm going to do, most of these people are likely technically inclined. If you are familiar with the iPhone development channels, you can log on to irc.osx86.hu with your favorite IRC client. And if you want to just join iPhone-forensics, so you type /join followed by #iPhone-forensics. If you want to join that IRC chat room, I will just create a new room And if anyone had any questions they'd like to just ask in real time, that would probably be the quickest way to get answers.
Okay, good, good. Well,
I'll paste that into the little chat box down here.
In the chat box. That's very helpful. And I think we'll just wrap it up then, Jonathan. That was a great presentation. And again, I want to remind everyone that you can find, you see it on your screen right now, iphone.o'reilly.com. That will take you to everything iPhone related on that O'Reilly site, including Jonathan's books, our upcoming iPhone Live conference, and Jonathan's 2-day workshop. That'll be in Burlington, Massachusetts. And once again, we have the discount code if you're interested in signing up for that. It's Webcast, W-E-B-C-A-S-T. It'll give you 20% off the regular price, and just enter that when you're registering for the event. And Jonathan, thank you very much for once again giving a great webcast and doing it so well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Oh, hopefully I didn't go off the deep end.
I haven't seen any Z signs by people's names, so I think they're still awake. And everyone, thank you. I'm sorry if Jonathan didn't get to your questions.